If you are playing Impulse and still trying to better understand how to take advantage of everything the game has to offer, this video can help a lot. Although it seems straightforward at first, there are several details that make a difference as you play more and start to get the rhythm down. Some things are not so clear at first, and it is precisely these small adjustments that can greatly improve your experience. So today I want to share 10 advanced tips that help me play with more awareness, avoid some mistakes, and perhaps even evolve faster in the process. Maybe they can help you too, so stay with me until the end. I am Matthew, and the video is about to start. One of the things that most changed the way I play was learning how to properly use the grapple cancellation. At first, I used the grapple in a very basic way, just to get somewhere faster or reposition. But after I understood that you could cancel before landing, the game simply became much more fluid. For this, I recommend setting crouch to hold on shift and enabling the crouch cancels grapple option. It may seem like a small detail, but it gives you much greater control over movement. You are not stuck in the animation until the end. You can decide exactly when to exit the grapple and engage in another action. That is where it starts to get truly interesting. When you combine this with auto sprint, you can create a much more dynamic movement sequence. For example, you pull the grapple, cancel halfway, enter a slide, and chain it into a wall run. When you nail the timing, it feels like the game starts to respond much faster to your commands. It is not something you will master in 2 minutes, but it is well worth practicing. Because once this enters your muscle memory, you start to move much better than the average player and gain a real advantage in trades. It is the type of mechanic that does not seem essential at first, but once you learn it, it is hard to play without it. If there is one thing that separates an average player from a truly dangerous one, it is understanding that the paint bomb is not just utility, it is pure map control. I started playing better the moment I stopped using bombs reactively and started drawing the map before fights happen. You basically decide where the fight will take place and at what pace it will happen. Speed paint, for example, completely changes flank dynamics. Using it on walls during a wall run is not just about being faster, it is about being unpredictable. You create angles the enemy team simply does not expect, appear behind them in seconds, and vanish before anyone can react. In tighter maps, this becomes even more absurd as you shorten routes in a way that feels almost unfair. Jump paint, on the other hand, is the type of tool that, once mastered, makes it feel like you are playing a different game. Creating improvised vertical routes or using it as a launch pad in the middle of a fight opens up possibilities that do not naturally exist on the map. You can initiate fights with a height advantage, escape lost situations, or even bait enemies into bad positions. For me, the real differentiator lies in the intelligent use of sticky paint and heal paint. Sticky at a choke point halts an entire team's advance, especially against mechs that rely on mobility. They get practically trapped. Meanwhile, heal paint in objective areas turns defense into something much more sustainable. If you place these bombs before the fight starts, you are not reacting to the game, you are shaping it in your favor. One of the things that made me evolve the most was stopping the approach to fights through the obvious path. Most players are always focused on ground level, aiming straight ahead, expecting a frontal confrontation. When you start exploring angles from above or from the sides, it feels like the game slows down just for you. Suddenly, you are no longer contesting the fight, you are initiating it with an advantage. The grapple, combined with wall running, is simply broken when used with intent. It is not just mobility, it is an aggressive positioning tool. Arriving above an enemy completely changes their reaction because almost no one is prepared to look vertically under pressure. And when you time this correctly, you enter the fight practically invisible until the very last second. Now, something many people underestimate: a grapple on an enemy is not just for closing the distance, it is for execution. When you connect, the melee is instant, and this decides a duel in a fraction of a second. Instead of trading shots and relying on pure aim, you turn the confrontation into something much more controlled and fast. This is especially strong against players who are too static or stuck in cover. Perhaps the most common mistake I see is players advancing in a straight line. In Impulse, this is practically asking to die. Using vertical cover changes everything. You enter and exit lines of sight constantly, break the enemy's tracking, and force errors. When you mix this with attacks from above and from the flanks, You stop being predictable, and in a game this fast, unpredictability is what really wins matches. One thing I learned the hard way is that you cannot ignore the mechs. At first, I treated them as just another element of the match, but after a few losses, it became clear when a team controls the mechs, the game changes completely. What works best here is playing as a real team. Calling out spawn timing, organizing before they appear, and arriving prepared makes a huge difference. When the team is aligned on this, you practically decide who gets the advantage in that wave. When facing them, using items like the Volta along with anti-mech focused perks helps immensely. But more important than that is focusing on the same target. First, break the shield, then pressure the pilot, aiming for the hatch. When everyone hits together, the mech falls much faster than it seems. One thing I avoid at all costs today is trying to solve this alone. Going head-on against a mech without support is almost never worth it. When the team understands this and starts to contest mechs in a coordinated way, especially in objective modes, the difference in the match result is huge. If there is one thing that separates an average player from a truly dangerous one in Impulse, it is how you handle momentum. This game was not made for those who walk, it was made for those who flow. Standing still or walking in a traditional way simply turns you into an easy target. When you start maintaining constant movement, whether with a forward or backward wall run, a well-placed grapple, or even a quick slide, you become much harder to predict and consequently much harder to hit. The secret here is not just to move, but to chain everything together like a dance. You do not want to perform isolated actions, you want to connect them. Start with a wall run, pull a grapple at the right timing, land into a hollow jump, and activate speed paint to keep the pressure on. When you get this rhythm, the entire map becomes your playground. The most interesting part is that this is not just about style. It directly impacts your combat performance. Now, of course, this does not mean moving around like a madman without thinking. There is a right moment to slow down when you find a good angle. Stopping for a second to ensure a clean shot can be worth much more than continuing to move without precision. The difference is that you choose when to stop. The game does not force you to. This completely changes how you control confrontations. Finally, verticality is simply absurd in this game. Whoever masters the vertical axis is practically playing a different game. Using the jetpack, hollow jump, and grapple to attack from above, or reposition quickly creates opportunities that many people do not even notice. So if you really want to evolve, start thinking less about the ground and more about the entire space around you. This is not just an FPS, it is three-dimensional movement all the time. One thing many people ignore, but which made a big difference for me, was properly adjusting the settings. It is not something that changes the game on its own, but when you get it right, everything becomes clearer and more comfortable to play. I like to leave the FOV at 120 because it significantly increases the field of view, especially in more chaotic situations. I also recommend setting a striking enemy color like pink and keeping the highlight in red. It seems like a detail, but it helps a lot to spot enemies quickly and not lose the target in the middle of the action. Regarding movement, having auto sprint on makes the game much more fluid, while having auto jetpack off gives you more control. This avoids accidental activations and makes you more precise in your decisions, especially in tighter moments. As for sensitivity, I adapted better to a higher one, along with attachments like improved grip or laser sight. This helps a lot with tracking, especially because combat in Impulse is fast and chaotic. It is not a fixed rule, but when you find a setup that works for you, the difference appears quickly in your performance. A turning point for me was stopping the selection of weapons because they seem good and starting to build a loadout based on my playstyle. When you understand whether you play more aggressively, more for flanks, or more for area control, everything starts to make sense. From the weapon to the perks. The loadout ceases to be generic and starts to amplify what you already do well. Attachments also make more of a difference than it seems, especially if you are still gaining consistency. Using 2 attachments is essential, and the extended mag for me is almost mandatory at the start. Having more bullets in the mag gives you room to miss, hold pressure, and not lose a duel due to a poorly timed reload. This alone greatly increases your survivability. Regarding weapons, there are some choices that help a lot in this adaptation phase. The explosive SMG is absurd in close combat, especially for those who like to go in aggressive. The Carbine and Coda SMG are more balanced and work very well for learning positioning and recoil control without suffering as much. They are weapons that do not punish you as much while you improve. Perks close out this sustain package. Kill Runner and Kill Refresh keep you in the fight after a kill, which pairs very well with aggressive gameplay. But one tip I always follow: test all this in TDM before going to ranked. There, you can make mistakes without punishment, understand your rhythm, and adjust the loadout until it really fits the way you play. A mechanic I barely used at the beginning, but which today I find very strong, is grappling onto teammates and even mechs. We tend to think of the grapple only as an individual tool, but when you start to use this with the team, it opens up several possibilities. You can use it on allies to gain an extra movement boost and reposition much faster than walking alone. Instead of taking a longer route, you simply pull yourself towards someone who is already well positioned and join the fight, which already changes the dynamics quite a bit. With mechs, this also gets interesting, especially for unexpected approaches. Depending on the situation, you can use the mech as an entry point for a flank or even to coordinate an attack together with whoever is piloting. In the end, what made the difference for me was starting to look at the grapple not just as personal mobility, but as a synergy tool. When you use this in conjunction with the team, movements become less predictable and plays start to fall into place in a much more natural way. One of the most underrated things in Impulse is audio. If you truly pay attention to the sounds of the weapons, you start to read the enemy before even seeing them. The rhythm of the shots, the cadence, even small variations give away the type of loadout that is coming in your direction. And this completely changes how you react. There are weapons you can challenge head on, and others where you already know it is better to reposition before the guy even appears on the screen. But it is no use just reading the enemy if you do not know how to manage your own resources. The Grapple, Jetpack, and P.A.I.N.T are practically your survival, and spending everything at once is asking to be left vulnerable. Many people enter combat using everything on Impulse and then have no options left to escape or reposition. Playing well here means knowing how to hold back, using it at the right moment, and always keeping an ace up your sleeve. The Grapple specifically has a detail that makes a big difference: using it intelligently to manage to cancel and reuse it faster. It is not just about crossing the map, it is about choosing points where you can interrupt the movement and prepare another use in sequence. When you master this, your mobility becomes much more consistent and unpredictable. In the end, all this becomes an absurd advantage in combat. You understand the enemy through sound, control your cooldowns calmly, and still move efficiently without overexposing yourself. It is that type of adjustment that does not seem so flashy at first, but when it clicks, you start winning trades that previously seemed impossible. If there's one training that really makes a difference in Impulse, it is sitting in TDM and practicing movement until it becomes automatic. I really like starting in the plaza because the map forces you to use the basics well without punishing you too much. Instead of trying to do everything at the same time, focus on a specific chain, like a wall run, then a grapple, then a hollow jump. When this clicks in your fingers, you start to move around the map without thinking, and this completely changes the pace of your matches. The point here is not just to get faster, but to get consistent. When you master a movement sequence, you reduce silly mistakes and start winning duels just by positioning. And this connects directly to understanding map routes. Knowing where to rotate, where to flank, and where to escape is worth more than just having good aim. Now, when you leave TDM and go to objective modes, all this gains even greater weight. In upload, intel, and control, it is not just about killing. It is about controlling space. And that is where the use of P.A.I.N.T comes in. Strong, you start to block routes, accelerate your team's advance, and even hold an area just by manipulating the terrain. The map stops being fixed and becomes something you adapt to every fight. And there is a detail that many people ignore: communication. Calling out mech spawns or intel routes seems simple, but it decides matches. When the team knows what is coming and from where, everyone positions themselves better and avoids being caught off guard. For me, this is the complete combo: consistent movement, map reading, and communication. When this fits, the game simply flows.